Hi everyone, we are back with another Inside Crypto podcast, and I am excited because today's episode we actually have someone who's not from research, who's not from legal, who's actually from product, and someone who I've actually had conversations with indirectly over the past year or so, who's like supremely smart and one of the first few people who were like, "Hey, Korean, I think you have something to say," when we had like a team meeting. So let me introduce you today to Krishnan Nair, an engineering and MBA professional focused on building technology products and high-performing teams. He's also currently VP of Product at 21Co, which is why he's here on the podcast. And today, Krish is going to talk about whatever he's able to. Krish, thank you so much for making time. It's really fun. I'm excited about today's podcast. Why don't you fill our audience in a little bit about your background, who you are, and anything else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, and firstly, thank you, Kriyan, for those kind words. A little about myself. So I grew up in India, pretty much there till I was 21, came to the US, just like everyone's dreams, came to do more studies. I come from an engineering background, found myself right after college and right after undergrad getting in my first job at Samsung, which is very interesting. So this was right at 2010. Back then, we call it a recession as well. And it was a very interesting time. I'd interned with them, and my old boss back then was like, "Hey, remember what you worked on as an intern? That product has actually gone live. So why don't you come back and look at it as an analyst and operations?" Long story short, that was actually the first Samsung smart TV, or the first ever app store that was built on Samsung TVs. So it was very interesting. I was zoning between content partners, like, for example, the Netflix, Disney's of the world, based everywhere globally, and with the engineering team in Korea sitting out of US. So it was a very interesting aspect of things. Since then, mostly moved on working in technology companies. In the last 10 years, I've worked in two startups. I seem to have found my niche there, and overall been very focused in media and entertainment for 14 years. And while I was doing that, I had the opportunity to go to business school as well, which, coming from an engineering background and with Indian parents, it was something I had to do as a checklist item, but it was very informative. And that kind of got my interest into finance. And a year ago, when an opportunity came to join 21Co to build products, I jumped at the opportunity.
Fantastic. You mentioned Indian parents, and I've got to ask because, like, not even Indian, like Asian parents in general. Okay, you got to be an accountant, you got to be a doctor, you got to be a lawyer, you got to be an engineer. One of those four, otherwise you're a failure, right? So, did you grow up like having that engineering mindset and like problem solving and working with your hands, that sort of stuff, or was that something you're like, okay, my mom, my dad want this, I'm just gonna do it?
Yeah, very interesting question. So, just from a household standpoint, we have an engineer, we have a doctor, and three accountants.
Wow.
So that's the family. But I actually got into technology pretty early. We had a 485 back home when I was around 7 or 8 years. I was used to play a lot of games on it. Actually, I learned HTML. I actually built a website when I was 11 years old. I was helping my uncle build a website. Nothing fancy. We were using coffee cup software back then, but that's really when I started getting into a lot more technology items. And this is back in 98, 99. Yeah, long story short, a combination of that and doing some form of internship at my uncle's storeroom where I was dealing with all of the consumer electronics devices. I ended up in my first gig, which is at Samsung, because it was a perfect combination of software and hardware.
Nice. You're doing what I would imagine more software these days? Not really, but do you still have that inclination to work with hardware?
As in, look, hardware is important. It's the user experience at the end of the day from a product standpoint. But I have, ironically, when I started my college course, I joined as a hardware expert. But then by the time I finished my courses, I took so many software programming courses that in the end, my degree had to change around it. So I think, yes, even though today the world is in software, we're using it on different types of hardware. So I do keep on track in terms of what are the changes that are coming in, because computing and processing is always important to know because it has direct impact on the software usage and the user experience overall.
Okay, nice. I'm a big hardware fan. We grew up, so I just figured out like similar times. I grew up building computers, but we're going to move on to the real questions for today because people want to know what's happening at 21Co, what you do at 21Co. Before we get started, I got to remember anything I say does not constitute financial or legal advice. Our opinions are our own and not to be connected back with 21 Shares or 21Co. Listeners, you've heard me say this 152 times already, so do your own research. Krish, it's got to be our first question is people would have probably looked you up because I did mention who you're coming on the show. Do you want to tell everyone what you're doing at 21Co? There are a lot of exciting things that maybe you can't talk about in detail, but maybe you want to talk about some things as an overview.
Yeah. So primarily the goal of technology products in an organization and how we bring it to 21Co is very interesting. For example, one line of area that we focus on is ensuring that our core businesses are supported by technology products. So for asset management, which is what we do with ETPs, we have a proprietary technology solution or product called Onyx that we use in terms of issuance and operationalization. So a lot of the product area focus there is to bring efficiency to the business. Then we have a second set of product suite, which is basically where product is the business. It's more a product-led growth, product-led strategy, and so forth. Those, unfortunately, I cannot share right now at this moment, but there's a lot of things that's been happening. And hopefully by Q3, Q4, you'll start hearing a lot more momentum around it once we go to market. And then last but not the least, what we have is also a lot of shared services or shared platforms. And that's what we call as internal tools and data platforms and so forth that helps all of these different product lines. It helps them run properly such that whatever is needed from a commonality standpoint, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's really how we have grouped the product technology organization within 21Co.
Okay. And moving on, how does the company or how do you think about pushing products out? Like when is something ready to be pushed out?
Yeah, as in, look, we look at it from a first principle standpoint. At the end of the day, there is a hypothesis in terms of, hey, what would be a good feature or what would be a good product? Once that is done, we try to get into a little more research around it, right? So understand the competitors, talk to our customers. It's always about, at the end of the day, we're building this for customers. So start talking to prospects, see how they feel about it, talk to users, get an idea of, is this really solving a problem? Because we don't want to push out products that don't solve a problem at the end of the day. And then if we do push this product out, how is it going to help and can it be monetizable? So we spend a lot of time around that before we come to a conclusion saying, hey, this actually makes sense. Let's actually look at how we can use our engineering resources in being able to push it out. So we just go back to the first principles around it. It's helped us in doing any feature implementation of our existing products. It's helping us a lot for pushing out new products as well, because the market is still so new in terms of the area that we're looking at, that everything sounds like a problem. But the more we talk to our customers, we recognize that some of it already have solutions, so it doesn't make sense, or some are very interesting areas that we can actually add value to the ecosystem.
Okay. I'm going off script here because you just reminded me of something someone said. We had the chief strategy officer of Theta on last week, and he was saying, not every problem requires a crypto solution. And do you think that's true?
I do agree with that. As in, look, at the end of the day, I would love to throw crypto on everything or blockchain on everything. But I think what's very interesting is that if you really look at the area around where this comes handy is we want to solve practical applications today. When you look at technology as a whole, and I'll get into why I joined 21Co as well. So when we look at technology as a whole, technology is a disruptor. And for technology to be disrupting, you need a proper adoption curve. You need masses to actually start adopting it. So a lot of times you can go ahead and build products that would make sense in the future, but they have no practical applications today. And so we have to be very cognizant about it and make sure that, hey, what are we building today? Can it be straight away utilizable? That can help a customer or any internal user's problem while keeping an eye towards the future as well, because what we build today is the long-term plan as well. So absolutely agree with that statement.
Okay. Now, and I was thinking about something else, given your perspective on the technology side, on the product side, and the business side, right? Like I would say, like you have a comprehensive set of skills. Do you think having that business background and being in your current role is really helpful at the moment, given the market, given where the company is going?
Absolutely. 20 years ago, technology was a lot more IT. Now you see that technology is the business. And I think having a combination of both, especially in product management, is extremely useful because not only are you thinking about strategy, which is, hey, how do you monetize this? How do you really go to market with it? But you're also thinking execution with the engineering team. So you need to understand what you're building and be able to relay that and communicate with all of your stakeholders in the engineering or development team, which is engineering, QA, and so forth. So I absolutely do agree. Yeah.
Okay. And moving on to the questions, you're doing a lot of stuff, right? And there's some really fun stuff given your background. I think some stuff must not be the most exciting, but you do it and you do your best. What are the most rewarding and challenging parts about building out all these tech products?
So before I answer that, let me start with a story. I spent 14 years in media and entertainment, and the main disruptor there was internet that came in to start off with. For example, even though the internet was out in public in 93, Netflix as a company was out in 97, but Netflix really started using the internet for streaming. Back then, Netflix was a DVD company, but then they started using it for streaming around, I believe, around 2007/2008. And just a couple of years ago, YouTube was formed. So you see this impact that technology has on business organizations and business models. And fast forward now, everyone watches videos on the internet. You've come across this, and there are a few folks that still prefer the old system of how they're watching videos, which is through IPTV and cable systems. But overall, you look at the new generation, you look at the current generation, everyone wants to either watch it on their phone, on their laptop, on a smart TV, all streamed to the internet. So you see that as a disrupting factor. Why I wanted to start off with that is I see blockchain doing something very similar as a subcomponent of it that can actually help and disrupt the asset management industry. And a lot of the products that we're building on that is looking at its practical application. So blockchain at the end of the day is a distributed ledger. What it does is it provides transparency and security and ensures that the data is really immutable. So in the long run, you can start seeing a lot more practical applications where blockchain can help with peer-to-peer cloud distribution and storage type of services. But right now, there is a lot of aspects that take place in asset management. A great example is like an accounting ledger and so forth. Like we push out NAVs and PCF to our distribution partners that are needed. A lot of that information can actually live in an open system such that whoever needs to consume it are able to come there, get the information that is needed for them to do their day-to-day. So in that sense, I was pretty excited about, hey, moving into 21Co, where we could use a new technology disruptor in the right industry vertical. And a lot of the products, for example, something like Onyx, right now we are very focused on building is how do we make sure it's efficient, but we're always keeping an eye towards how do we continue supporting the new use cases that are coming. You see a lot of folks talk about tokenization. You see a lot of folks talking about having an open ledger or a distributed ledger. So we're slowly thinking, how do we start incorporating that and bring it into our Web2 systems to be compatible into this Web3 world?
Nice. That is really cool and a good story to put all of that into context. You work with a bunch of really cool people. I've spoken to some of them and I've talked about some of them on this podcast before. But how do you go about building out a team, right? And how do you lead a product organization?
Yeah, I think that's the toughest part of the job, is because you are searching for attitude and skill set at the end of the day. Now, no one is really born a product manager. Even my background was a little different, as in I was helping build products, not really recognizing that it was actually product management 101 back in the days. But I think what's interesting is when I go around and when we build and when we hire folks within 21Co, we look at, hey, what kind of business experience do they have, or what kind of technical expertise do they have? And then we start during the interview process, we also gauge their mindset. Are they growth mindset? Are they problem solving? How's their communication? So there's a lot of different soft skills that we also ensure that aligns with the candidate, because you could be a great subject matter expertise, but if you don't have the certain soft skills that is needed for product management, it can be a little challenging. Because again, we as product managers, we have to ensure that we are focused on strategy and execution around it and so forth. So I've been pretty fortunate with some of the existing team that we have in 21Co who are really sharp. And one of the reasons why I joined product management was I was in a room in the Valley back in the days with a few folks. And I was like, wow, these are the sharpest people I've ever been in a room with. And that just motivated me to get into product management.
Oh, nice. And speaking from your perspective, right? Because I've spoken to different people over the last 20 years or so, and everyone has like a thing that they look for in somebody. Of course, you mentioned soft skills, hard skills, right? But what is that thing that, like, okay, you're sitting down, you're talking to this person, you're like, oh my God, this person is awesome because they have this thing. So what's that thing that stands out to you?
I think one thing that I've been really trained on, that I try to ensure that I find in a person who's applying for a product management role, is someone not jumping into conclusions. Because in product management, yes, the end goal is to create something that solves an outcome, but there's nothing worse if you spend time not understanding the problem. So let me give you an example. Let's assume someone comes in and says, hey, I need this. The first goal is, hey, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Because if we are not spending time and effort to ensure that we're solving the right problem, all the work that comes after is of no use or bears no fruits if it is not solving the problem in the first case. So usually when we talk to candidates, really look at their problem solving mindset is very important. We also look at a step before that, saying, hey, how do you approach this? How do you even understand what the problem is? And how would you be able to put it into a structured way of problem solving? So that's something that we care about quite a lot.
Okay, nice. You are currently VP of product, and you've talked a little bit about like why you got into product management. We spoke about this before this call, right? Which is again unique for this podcast. We don't really have pre-podcast calls, which I'm very glad that we did. You mentioned like you were incidentally doing product management already, right? And so why did you decide, okay, after incidentally doing it, why do you decide, okay, this is going to be it? Like, I think it's very rare for people to have that like clarity in the life of, okay, I want to do this for my career.
Yeah. As in, I was fortunate enough to be in a customer facing roles in my career where I think at the end of the day, the fundamentals of product is talking to customers. So I built that skill set first. I was trained as an engineer, so I was always comfortable with technology. There were some things that were missing that I thought added to a dimension was actually going to, for me personally, was just learning that in business school. Right during my career, I did actually get an opportunity to be a director of product very early in my career. I look back on that quite a bit. This is 4 or 5 years in, but I decided not to pursue it for various reasons. I think I should have. But long story short, it just continued bringing me into product companies and just spending time with product managers. I'm a very hands-on person. I like to understand the stuff, get to the details, know everything and so forth. And I felt that when I did a small stint in product management before I was running a business organization, I absolutely enjoyed that, which is talking to folks, getting at the grassroots level and so forth. I became very cognizant of what I love doing as a part of my career, which is getting at that granular level and grassroots level. That's why I've made a conscious decision of a certain size of company at a certain size of product teams and so forth that I join in. And this role I knew was going to be very hands-on coming in and needed some of the backgrounds that I had, the experience that I had, including some form of technology experience. So that is where I really focused on. And when I got the opportunity, I just jumped at it.
Nice. Very interesting. Very appropriate time to jump on things. Krish, given everything that's happening, there's so many interesting things that are going on in the company. Perhaps you could shed some light on, I think I'm very passionate about one area, and I think anyone who knows this podcast will know what exactly I'm interested in. And we won't talk about that just yet. But for you, doing everything that you're doing, right? Like the tech, the business, the product, the people, what's something you're passionate about at the moment?
Yeah.
What's waking you up in the morning like, oh my God, I can't wait to do this?
Yeah, it's truly asset management technology. I absolutely enjoy solving business problem with technology solutions. That's actually my quote or my motto. Blockchain as a disruptor that comes in, there's a lot of applications of that can actually help enhance the use cases for the end user through our asset management technology. So that's where we really spend time in Onyx and think about how do we do that. So that's something that gets me very excited, which is, hey, how do we continue to innovate while we solve real use cases that can help both our internal customers, and how can that help externally as well within the industry? Because it's still a very early industry in terms of asset management technology. A lot of systems have been there for a long time. They do a fantastic job, but I think there is an opportunity out there where we can use better use cases out of technology and start bringing it back to make things even more efficient. As an example, like our team internally, as in we have a pretty small size operations team to run a large number of products, and that's possible because of the technology solutions that we provide them.
That's very true. And I think we had that again on another past podcast where someone was saying that through blockchain, they were able to do things at a cost efficiency that you wouldn't be able to do if you were like a big player in asset management, right?
Yeah, no, hands down. And then to your point, in terms of what also gets me excited about is convergence. I know this has been a theme within our company, but as in what convergence is, it's a connecting segment between two universes. We know that Web3 is happening right now as we speak. There are a lot of systems happening in Web2, and at some point there will be an intersection. Going back to my analogy of how there was intersection of internet. And when that happens, you'll see a lot of leapfrogging use cases. So what are leapfrogging use cases? Like mobile is a great example. There were a lot of places that did not have the infrastructure of a telephone line, but when mobile telecommunication came in, folks were able to jump one hoop altogether and be able to be interconnected with folks directly in mobile. And I see that there are certain use cases that can help in not just asset management, but also in fintech overall with blockchain, because things like immutability and faster settlement times or real-time settlement times has really good impact when it comes to that.
Yes, especially real-time settlement is awesome and interesting. Krish, talking more about Convergence, right? We had a really popular YouTube clip with our co-founder Ophelia and president of 21 Co 21 Shares. And you've mentioned it as well. You explained what Convergence is. And it's happening in some areas, and talking about NFTs as well. Nike's dabbled and other people have dabbled in, I would say, areas that will affect people. But at the same time, like our director of research, Ellie, mentioned, like only 300 million people in the world have access to crypto and the associated technologies. When do you see convergence actually affecting more people?
If I had a crystal ball, I'd win the lottery. But that being said, look, I think what's very interesting, what I can share for a fact is we are seeing a lot of enterprises in the space doing active work in blockchain and blockchain practical applications. I think unlike a lot of other technology, if we are able to move our enterprise systems into blockchain, I think that adoption itself may help scale quite a bit. And we are looking at it from that perspective because let's a very simple example. Actually, I met a founder, I think a year ago, and he was using blockchain as a way to ensure that there is no counterfeit secondhand ticket sales that come out there. So imagine you're trying to go to a game, or if you're trying to go to a concert and you're trying to buy a secondary ticket, right? There is always the fear of, hey, am I going to get a fake ticket or is it going to be an authentic ticket? And so as the end user experience externally for a user, it doesn't matter. All you're doing is you're getting a ticket, but you have the whole technology stack that sits behind it, which is ensuring that what was there was registered and authentic and so forth. So I see a lot of that coming into place. And I think once you see a lot more, once that happens in the next, I would say 2 to 5 years, that's when you'll see a lot more shift, even from the end user standpoint, who have adopted into this ecosystem. Again, it's my personal opinion, but that's how I look at it.
No, I think that's a very good point as well, because that's something I try to talk to people about. And people always, it's not going to happen. Crypto's trying to find a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. You've probably seen a lot of that in media. People always ask me the same question, like, when are we actually going to have a crypto solution for your mother, my mother, people back in India, people back in South Africa, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and just going back to that, right? I think that's the beauty of technology or any disruptor is a lot of times you're not able to see the practical application of it today because it's solving tomorrow's problem. That's exactly what convergence is, which is it can open up a lot more new use cases that are not possible today. And I think as the technology evolves, as the adoption evolves, as the business problems evolve, we are able to find those next use cases that can help drive into a better value proposition as well. So that's, I think, is very interesting.
Nice. I'm very cognizant of the time as well. So let's move on to the last question, Krish. We're stepping out of 𝕠𝕕𝕖 ℂ𝕠𝕕𝕖 and crypto and product management and looking at cryptocurrency and the industry as a whole. You being in the US, but being from India and having traveled to Asia as well multiple times, like, what do you think the future holds for cryptocurrency as an industry? What about the shift? The common theme in the media these days is, oh my God, Hong Kong, everyone's going to move to Hong Kong because of regulation. In the US, people also talk about MiCA or MiCA in the EU being somewhat strict as well. And they were like, okay, Asia is going to be the first place. What do you think about the way the industry is heading at the moment?
So moving outside of the technology, if you look at crypto as an asset class and its application, look, we are in a constantly fast-paced world where folks are traveling. You're moving from point A to point B. Even within places like Asia, which is almost, I think, 80%, 70% of the population, there's a lot of folks still don't have access to infrastructural banks just because the remote population is around 40 to 50%. Where I'm going with this is I genuinely, personally, I'm able to see a fantastic use case of having some form of currency value, which is what crypto is, that is global. Let's take an example of in Africa, especially when you're living in remote regions. So now all of a sudden you use SIM cards to be able to do transaction, right? So that's a particular use case where with internet and with crypto, it can actually become a global currency type of an exchange. When you're traveling, let's assume when you're gone from US to Europe to Asia and so forth, it does get extremely annoying each and every time you have to go and do a currency exchange and get the worst currency exchange that is needed to do transaction and so forth. And I think having some form of a currency that is accepted as a global standards will help a lot of consumer and user pain points. It will also help with a lot of other things, including counterfeit and so forth. But to get that, I think regulation right now is fantastic. It's exactly what we need in the system. The last meltdown a year ago actually took a lot of bad actors out of place. We saw this in the internet in early 2000 as well, where everybody called themselves an internet company and that created a bubble and so forth. And I think it's overall good for the ecosystem. And once you have regulation in place, that's going to actually encourage a lot of central entities to start adopting this and looking at it, which is already happening, but you'll see a lot more quicker traction. And once that happens, it will benefit the end user or the end consumer, so that it will make life easier. If you see our technology adoption in the last 40 years, it's just been insane in comparison to the evolution of humans. And this is something that it will keep on adding. So I see a lot of applications of it that will be helpful back home.
Nice. And I totally agree with you. Like, I think recently in South Africa, there was a tornado just like north of where my mom lives, and it wiped out like a bank and a few other places. And there was flooding last year. And so like people couldn't move around a lot. And South Africa has like multiple issues, like no power for 3 days in some areas. And if you want to go to the bank, I'm sorry, your ATM doesn't have power. You're out of luck, right? I totally agree with what you're saying, Krish.
And just to add to that, I think also coming out of the last 3 months or 6 months, even banks have not been safe. Yes. So I think that's been a challenge altogether. And what happens is that at the end of the day, it's the end user, or it's the individual folks, their hard-earned money, which is kept in, that's what gets affected. And their inability to take money for themselves is something that we need to start looking as just a human civilization. And if that's the right approach of how we are using technology now, but I see a lot of challenges there that can be solved in a certain way. And to your point, we are also seeing internet now move from regular telco towers to like Starlink. We're going satellite based and so forth. So technology is evolving. As technology evolves, we'll just see how it will have tremendous impact on blockchain and for fintech.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Krish. Krish, we're at that point in today's podcast and video, right, where I open the floor to you. People have said lots of really cool things in the last 150 episodes or so. So take as much time as you want. Words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom, thoughts, philosophies. What would you like to leave the audience with today?
I love the spectrum of where we went through. We spoke about product management. We spoke about what we are doing. We spoke about the technology and the disruption in the use cases. And if you really look at it, I see a change that is coming in terms of technology disruption through fintech for asset management. I think some of the work that we are doing here at 21Co is to enable that change. It's not to just compete, but also to enable other folks in the organization, because as an ecosystem, if we all succeed, it helps the end user that comes in. And a lot of Web3 use cases that can also help today's Web2 use cases, not just within our industry, but even outside through different business verticals and so forth. And just for any aspiring product managers, just be yourself, be honest, be true. And just always, before you solve the problem, try to identify and see what the problem is first.
I love those words of advice. That is going to be one TikTok short that lasts 10 seconds or so. Krish, I appreciate your time today. It's so wonderful to have two conversations with you, because after we met the first time, I'm like, oh man, I really hope we get to have a chance to chat. As usual, the links, all 21Co's links will be there. Krish, your LinkedIn will be there. So if you guys like what Krish said, and I'm sure you did, you can follow him on LinkedIn. Occasionally, I would say probably a bit more this year, and maybe moving into next year, we'll see more of him, hopefully on this podcast if we get another chance, or hopefully in other ways. So keep an eye out for that. Krish, enjoy the rest of your morning, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Thank you, Krish, and thank you for having me here.
My pleasure.